position to be set. At this point on this keyframe, this text will be at this position and this position, X and Y, horizontal, vertical. So if we move our timeline viewer to about 15 seconds, and then we move our text back down, we can see in the timeline viewer that we've automatically, because there's a keyframe for it to go against, we've automatically created a new keyframe by changing the text position. And what this now does is means that between that and this one, the text needs to change position from this to what we've now set it as. So if we move, our text moves for us. What I do know is that that's not the dead center, and I want to be clean and concise. So I use this blue bar, this grey bar at the top with the blue dots. Zoom nice and in, and I can go over this one. And if I'm over it, any more changes I do to it will apply to this. So I'll go back up to align, and I'll just align it nicely. So there we are. So now if we just pull it back out so we can see the whole composition, and we press play, our text moves down nicely. It's taking, though, 15 seconds to get all the way from the top to the bottom, the area that we started it and where we finished it. So what we can do is then use our little blue dots again, bring it in, and we can actually take our keyframe, single click and drag it to, let's say, 3 seconds. That's about 3 seconds, isn't it? So then we start again. Still taking quite a long time, so let's speed it up a bit. Once we are magnified in further than seconds, we can see individual frames. So here we're at about 20 frames, and that's a second's worth of frames. And that moves us down. With that, you can essentially start playing. One thing you may notice is this is quite pixelated, it's in low resolution. That's because here, what we looked at earlier in this drop down, I'm only at a quarter the resolution that it should be rendering at. And that's because it will play faster for us whilst editing. So if I had quite a high resolution piece of footage and I was editing it and playing it over and over again to get something right with it, I'd view it in lower resolution so it's not as difficult for the renderer to keep doing. If I go to full, there we are, nice and clean. But what you may see here, this is a good example. If I go from quarter to full, if I change what we're doing, so if I create a new piece of animation where it goes slightly smaller, you'll see here these green areas is what the renderer has stored, has already learned that it can play. If there's gaps in this green area, that means it hasn't played it before, or it's trying to play it and it's loading, and that isn't really happening with this because it's just a piece of text that we've created. But if it's a large piece of footage that we're editing, then you need time for the renderer to load these things. It's a video player, but it's also calculating any and everything that we've done to our footage, anything we've layered it with, but then it's also doing all the other things, all the other layers, all the other effects. So you need to give it time, and one way to give it time is to just lower the resolution so it doesn't have to work so hard making everything pixel perfect. One thing that is quite important, when you want to manipulate something with these free transform options here, what they may not be seen. So one very useful button here is to is this sort of piece of paper with a cutout on the top left hand side. If you click that, then you have the layer manipulation pieces. We have this all the time because on this one because it's a piece of text we've created. But if it was a piece of footage, etc., we wouldn't have this. So make sure that's on, and we can drag those around. So let's create something new. So to delete keyframes, which is absolutely fine, we can drag over, or we can just click and delete or backspace, and then that keyframe is gone. So what I may want to do now is create something a bit more interesting. So with our text drop down, we have animation options specific to text layers that we've worked with. So I'm going to give us a bit more space here. If we go animate, I think I'd like to animate the position again, but I'm going to try to do it letter by letter. So what we can do is see here in the text drop down, since we selected to change the position through the animate, it's given us an animator, and we can change the position with the range selector. So we've got a range selector here, and this, if we look at our piece of text here, this changes the position the animation will be applied. So right now it's the full length and width, and this is when it starts and ends. This is when the animation starts and ends. So the animation will start at 0 and end at 0. What we want it to do is start at 0 here, so we can go and we can create a keyframe, and then go, let's zoom out a bit so we can see seconds, and then go to say 1 second, and we would like it to be 100. And nothing's happened yet. Nothing will happen. What we've done is make it so the start position of the animation is moving across the text there. But what we want to do is change the position. So we want to move us down. So what's that done now? If we have the position changing to this keyframe, that lets us have that. What I can see is it's moving quite fast, so I might pull away a wee touch, maybe 2 seconds. That's a bit slow, a bit boring. What I may do is have it coming from off screen, so maybe change the position of the text from the get-go to off screen, and then have the position of the animation bringing us into the center, which I believe was about 580. No, it's too high. Okay. That's very quick now, so let's put it away. Good afternoon, class. So those are the beginnings of creating a piece of animated type with After Effects. From here, the deliverable is an MP4. So if we want to render this, just this composition, if I pull us out, we're on 30 seconds. So what I may do is make us a bit more dynamic. I'll just pull it in. I'll make this I'll keep it as a 30-second animation. So remember, this is the full render time. Let's just close this to keep it neat. This is the full render time. I'll probably just set this to be there. So this is the full render time. When we go up to composition, this allows us to look at the composition settings, but from here we can also render our piece of footage, our composition. We're in composition 1, so the renderer will know that that's what we are referring to when we ask it to be rendered. You should all, with Adobe CC, have Adobe Media Encoder there and available. The render queue is a piece of kit that's in After Effects. So if I open up the render queue, this has various settings here. When we open up the render queue or any other composition, they appear here. We can go back to composition 1 or look at the render queue or any other compositions that may appear. So we have multiple settings here. Like you see, it's composition 1 that we'll be rendering. Settings, we can click that to see the render settings. We don't need that at the moment. But when we click output 2, this lets us change what and where we're outputting our piece. The only option is a .mov file, as that's what After Effects renders out as standard. That's not what we want. Also, .movs are notoriously large files. They're much larger than an MP4. So what we're going to use is an extremely useful piece of kit called Adobe Media Encoder. So we click send to Adobe Media Encoder. What Adobe Media Encoder does is it allows cross-contact, cross-editing between different Adobe Suite pieces of software using something called the Dynamic Link Server. There is another piece of video editing software called Premiere, for example, and this that's just appeared here, this is the Adobe Media Encoder. That allows a conversation between, let's say, After Effects and Premiere, or render something, a piece of footage directly from Media Encoder into Premiere, or various other renders straight into and out of these softwares. And what we have is several panels. So I'll close After Effects here in the background so we can really see Media Encoder. Here it is. So we have several panels. We have the media browser here, which is essentially a finder for a Windows Explorer or whatever software you're on. It just lets us search for footage. Here we have presets for us to render out to. This is the encoding area. This shows us what's going on. If something's rendering, if it's empty, nothing's going on. We can see the progress. It'll have a little preview window. It'll have any errors that pop up as well. But what we have here is the render queue. This is the queue of footage or layers or images or whatever it is you're trying to render, and their current status. So what this is here is the file and location that this will be outputted to. What After Effects does is it creates, Media Encoder does, sorry, is it creates a temporary file. If you've not saved your After Effects file, this is what it does. It creates a temporary area on your machine, and it's a lovely, secure place for all of your files. But when you save your After Effects, it'll place any of these renders with that, which is extremely useful. So save your work in After Effects first, and then come here. Beyond that, this is the preset that we'll be using, match source. So that will match the dimensions, the height and width, and the frame rate, etc. of your original piece of work from After Effects. Here we say, it says H264, it should say. That is the encoder. Don't get worried when I say encoder. It's not something you really have to deal with. It's just something that we're going to learn about a little bit. You're not video editors. If you want to get into motion graphics and things like that, then you'll learn this organically as well, and hopefully maybe this is the start of that journey. But that is the encoding that we're going to use to compress this into a piece of footage. If we click it, see here, opening dynamic link connection, that lets us know that it's trying to get all the information it can from After Effects. So what we are changing here, we're not going to change it because it's perfect, but what we can change here is the format. And this shows us all the different ways that we can render this. We can render it as a sequence of PNGs, like every frame is a PNG. We don't want that. Or every frame's a JPEG, or in Blu-ray, or in a GIF. Lots of different options. We can also change the timeline. We have the basic settings. Everything's fine. Don't worry about that. Again, match source. So match it to the After Effects dimensions, etc. So we haven't changed anything there. So don't worry. I just wanted to run through it. So we click play and it will render. It shows how we're rendering. It shows how long's left. It shows what's the dimensions of various pieces of information. And then hopefully you will get a little tick. And then we click our file location, now that it's done. And we have comp1 mp4, that's the composition was called comp1. We click, and there's our file. There's our mp4, there's our video. So there's a lot there, and this is the first time you'll be using After Effects, most of you, I reckon. It's a new bag of tricks, but it's amazing to play with. This brief is quite open. The prerequisites are it's a piece of type, and it's then a piece of animated type, and then an MP4. If you have problems with Media Encoder or getting work over to Media Encoder, let me know. And we'll work through that together. Once it's fixed, you'll have this amazing piece of kit that lets you convert PNGs to JPEG. Like in Media Encoder, you can drag and drop any sort of file, basically any sort of visual file, and convert it into something else extremely quickly and extremely high quality. It's a wonderful piece of kit. Get used to using it, because you'll maybe one day have an extremely high-res JPEG that you want in PNG format, and you'll, instead of having to open up Photoshop and then convert it and make sure all the dimensions are the same, just drag and drop it into this and it will do it for you. The same with anything. If you wanted to make a GIF in Photoshop, actually you can just drag and drop it into there. But regardless, it's an amazing bit of kit, and After Effects is a wonderfully robust tool. So hopefully that's got you all on your way and you're feeling okay about After Effects. If you're not, I completely understand. It's a big bag of stuff, and working with timelines can be daunting, but it's no need to worry. It's images layered on top of one another, top down this way and left to right this way, and then it's all smushed together and makes a video. Right. Great stuff. Keep going, and I can't wait to see your work. Keep creating and keep at it.